The first gunshot rang out just as Elizabeth Summers stepped off the stagecoach, causing her to drop her valise and duck instinctively. Welcome to Silverdale, she thought grimly, clutching her locket, the only item of value she had left in the world. Down, miss! A strong hand pushed her behind the stagecoach wheels as 3 more shots cracked through the dusty air of the main street. Elizabeth found herself staring into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a face tanned by years under the western sun. Her rescuer wore a worn Stetson pushed back on his head, revealing strands of sandy brown hair. Bank robbers, he explained tersely, drawing his revolver. Stay put. The year was 1878, and Elizabeth Summers had arrived in Silverdale, Colorado territory. With nothing but a letter from her uncle and a desperate need to escape the life being forced upon her back east. The gunfire ceased abruptly, followed by thundering hoofbeats as the robbers fled town. The man beside her holstered his weapon and helped her to her feet. Not the welcome you were expecting, I'd wager, he said with a slight smile that transformed his serious face. Name's Matthew Vance. Most folks call me Matt. Elizabeth Summers, she replied, brushing dust from her traveling dress. I've come to stay with my uncle, Harold Summers. Do you know him? A shadow crossed Matthew's face. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, Miss Summers, but your uncle passed on 3 months back. Pneumonia took him quick. Elizabeth felt her knees weaken. Uncle Harold had been her last hope. Her only family willing to take her in after her parents' deaths had left her at the mercy of their creditors and at the mercy of the arrangement they'd made for her future. I see, she managed, fighting back tears. Then I suppose I shall have to find other accommodations until I can determine my next steps. Matthew studied her with those penetrating blue eyes. Your uncle's place is still standing. Nobody's claimed it yet. As the sheriff here, I can take you there, if you'd like. You're the sheriff? Elizabeth asked, noticing for the first time the silver star pinned to his leather vest. For my sins, he replied with a wry smile. Come on, I'll help you get settled. Uncle Harold's place turned out to be a small cabin on the outskirts of town, simple but sound. Matthew carried her trunk inside and lit the lantern, revealing a tidy, if dusty, interior. It's not much, Matthew apologized, but it's yours by right. Your uncle was well respected here, taught at our little schoolhouse. Elizabeth walked slowly around the cabin, running her fingers over her uncle's books, his writing desk, the rocking chair by the hearth. It's perfect, she whispered. Thank you. There's a pump out back for water, and I'll send over some supplies to get you through the next few days, Matthew said. Town's small, but folks are decent. You'll find work if you need it. I'll need it, Elizabeth said firmly. I didn't come west to be a burden. Matthew nodded approvingly. Get some rest, Miss Summers. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next. After he left, Elizabeth sat in her uncle's rocking chair and finally allowed herself to cry. The letter that had brought her west had been her lifeline, her escape from the marriage her parents' executor had arranged to settle their debts. A marriage to a man 3 times her age with a reputation that made her blood run cold. I'll find my own way, she promised herself, watching the sunset paint the western mountains gold. On my own terms. What she didn't know was how quickly those terms would be challenged. Elizabeth woke to knocking at her door the next morning. She hastily pinned up her chestnut hair and straightened her rumpled traveling clothes before opening the door to find a young woman holding a basket. Morning, I'm Sadie Porter, run the general store with my husband, the woman announced cheerfully. Sheriff Vance mentioned you'd arrived and might need some provisions. She thrust the basket forward. Fresh bread, preserves, some coffee and such to tide you over. That's very kind, Elizabeth said, touched by the gesture. Please, come in. Over coffee, Elizabeth learned more about Silverdale from the talkative shopkeeper. It was a growing town, prosperous from nearby silver mines and ranching. Sadie spoke highly of Sheriff Vance, fairest man you'll ever meet, and the bravest too, and filled Elizabeth in on the available work in town. Mrs. Henderson at the hotel needs a chambermaid, and Doc Wilson's looking for someone to help in his office, nothing medical, just keeping records and such. Then there's the schoolhouse. It's been closed since your uncle passed. Children are running wild as colts. Elizabeth's interest peaked at this last bit of information. I was a teacher back east, not officially, but I helped at a charity school in Boston. Sadie clapped her hands together. Providence! The town council's been looking for someone. You should speak with Mayor Hollister today. By that afternoon, Elizabeth had secured the teaching position, contingent on a 1-month probation period. The pay was modest, but included the cabin as part of her compensation. For the first time since receiving the devastating news of her parents' deaths, Elizabeth felt a flicker of hope. That hope dimmed considerably 3 days later, when a letter arrived from Boston. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she broke the wax seal. Inside was a terse message from Mr. Bentley, her parents' executor and the architect of her current predicament. Miss Summers, your sudden departure has caused considerable distress to Mr. Whitaker, who has been most generous in his offer to settle your parents' debts in exchange for your hand. I have informed him of your whereabouts. Expect his arrival within the month. Your duty is clear, and I trust you will fulfill your obligations like the well-bred young woman your parents raised. Cordially, J. Bentley, Esquire. Elizabeth crumpled the letter in her fist. Clarence Whitaker, a business associate of her father's, with cold eyes and colder hands, had wasted no time. The very thought of him made her skin crawl. She had met him exactly twice, and both times his gaze had wandered over her in a way that made her feel like property being assessed. That evening, she walked to Sheriff Vance's office, desperate for advice. She found him at his desk, reviewing wanted posters. Sheriff Vance, she began hesitantly, I find myself in need of counsel. Matthew looked up, his expression softening when he saw her distress. What troubles you, Miss Summers? She handed him the crumpled letter. As he read, his jaw tightened visibly. They ordered you to wed? His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the anger beneath. My parents died with substantial debts. Mr. Whitaker offered to clear them in exchange for me. She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. I fled rather than submit to the arrangement. Matthew rose from his desk and paced to the window. And now he's coming here to claim you. Yes. He turned to face her, his expression resolute. Then we'll choose each other, or not at all. Elizabeth stared at him. I beg your pardon? If this Whitaker arrives claiming your promise to him, the simplest solution is for you to already be spoken for. Matthew's gaze was steady, determined. I'm proposing an arrangement, Miss Summers, a false engagement to deter Whitaker. You would do that for me. You hardly know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know you came west alone, which takes courage. I know you immediately sought work rather than charity. And I know no woman should be forced to marry against her will. Elizabeth studied the man before her, tall, strong, with those honest blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. In the week she'd been in Silverdale, she'd heard nothing but good about Matthew Vance. Still, I cannot ask this of you. You didn't ask, I offered? He smiled slightly. Besides, it's temporary. Once Whitaker realizes you're not available, he'll return east. Then we can end our engagement with no harm done. Elizabeth considered the proposition. It was unconventional, certainly, but so was her situation. Very well, Sheriff Vance. I accept your offer of false betrothal. Matt, he corrected. If we're to be engaged even falsely, you should call me Matt. Then you must call me Elizabeth. She extended her hand, which he took gently. Thank you, Matt. News of their engagement spread through Silverdale like wildfire, generating far more excitement than Elizabeth anticipated. Women stopped her in the street to offer congratulations. Men slapped Matt on the back. Mayor Hollister's wife insisted on hosting a small celebration. I had no idea our engagement would cause such a stir, Elizabeth whispered to Matt as they stood receiving well wishes at the Hollisters' home 3 evenings later. It's been 5 years since I came to Silverdale, Matt explained under his breath. The local matchmakers had about given up on me. Elizabeth found herself enjoying the charade more than she should. Matt was attentive, kind, and when he took her hand or placed his at the small of her back to guide her through a room, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. They established a routine. Matt would walk her to the schoolhouse each morning and escort her home in the evenings. They would sit on her porch and talk as the sun set, getting to know one another as friends might, or, Elizabeth sometimes caught herself thinking, as a true courting couple would. She learned he had come west after the war, seeking a fresh start after losing his Maryland farm. He'd worked as a ranch hand, then a deputy, before becoming sheriff of Silverdale 3 years prior. He spoke little of his family back east, and she sensed old wounds there. In turn, she told him of her privileged but lonely childhood in Boston, her love of teaching, her dreams of someday traveling to Europe to see the great art and architecture she'd only read about. 2 weeks into their false engagement, Elizabeth was straightening up the schoolhouse after dismissing her students when Matt appeared at the door, his expression grave. "Whitaker's here," he said without preamble. "Got off the afternoon stage. He's taken a room at the hotel." Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs. So soon? The letter said within the month. Apparently he was eager. Matt crossed to her, taking her trembling hands in his. "Remember, you're spoken for now. He has no claim on you." "What if he doesn't accept it? What if he insists the prior arrangement stands?" "Then he'll answer to me," Matt said, his voice hard. "I won't let him bully you, Elizabeth. I promise you that." They walked to the hotel together, Elizabeth's hand tucked firmly in the crook of Matt's arm. She felt safer with him beside her, but dread still pooled in her stomach as they entered the hotel lobby. Clarence Whitaker sat in a leather armchair, looking as out of place in the rustic Western hotel as a peacock in a chicken coop. His expensive suit, gold watch chain, and meticulously groomed beard screamed Eastern wealth and privilege. His eyes narrowed when he saw Elizabeth, then shifted to Matt with open hostility. "Miss Summers," he said, rising, "I see you've acclimated to frontier life. How quaint." "Mr. Whitaker," Elizabeth acknowledged coolly. "May I introduce Sheriff Matthew Vance, my fiancé?" Whitaker's face darkened. "Fiancé? I think not. Your promise to me, as your parents' executor made quite clear." "I made no such promise," Elizabeth countered. "That arrangement was made without my consent, and I do not recognize it." "Your consent is immaterial. The agreement is legally binding, your hand for your parents' debts." Whitaker smiled coldly. "Unless, of course, you can repay the considerable sum they owed me. Can you, Miss Summers? Or can your sheriff?" Matt stepped forward. "Miss Summers is a free woman. She'll marry who she chooses." "And she's chosen me." Whitaker sneered. "How gallant and convenient. Tell me, Sheriff, did you know you're interfering with a legal contract? One that could see this young lady imprisoned for debt if not fulfilled?" Elizabeth gasped. "You wouldn't." "I most certainly would. Your father borrowed heavily from me, with the understanding that one way or another I would be compensated." His gaze raked over her possessively. "I've come to collect." "Then collect from me," Matt said firmly. "Name the amount. We'll work out terms." Whitaker laughed. "You, a backwater sheriff? The sum would take you 20 years to repay on your salary." "Then I'll find another way," Matt insisted. "Elizabeth stays free to make her own choice." $3,000, Whitaker said flatly. "That's what she owes, payable in full, in cash, within 1 week. Otherwise, she returns east with me as my bride." The amount was staggering. Elizabeth felt the room spin. 1 week, Matt agreed, much to her shock. "Now get out of our town." Whitaker smirked. "I've paid for a week's lodging. I'll be right here, counting the days." He turned to Elizabeth. "Pack wisely, my dear. Boston winters are so much harsher than here." After Whitaker retreated to his room, Elizabeth turned to Matt in disbelief. $3,000? Matt, that's impossible. You can't possibly raise that amount." "I'll find a way," he said grimly. "Come on, we need to talk privately." They walked in tense silence to her cabin, where Elizabeth finally broke down. "This is madness. I can't let you take on my family's debt. It's not your responsibility." "I made you a promise," Matt said firmly. "I intend to keep it. But how? Even if we sold everything I own, everything you own, we wouldn't come close to that amount." Matt paced the small cabin, thinking hard. "There's a high-stakes poker game that happens once a month at the Silver Dollar. Players come from all over the territory. Buy-in is steep, but the winnings can be substantial." Elizabeth stared at him. "Gambling? You would risk everything on cards?" "I'm good at reading people," Matt said. "It's part of being a sheriff." "And if you lose, you'd be ruined. For what? For someone you barely know?" Matt stopped pacing and faced her, his expression intense. "Is that what you think, that I barely know you? Elizabeth, I've spent every evening with you for 2 weeks. I know you take your coffee with a drop of honey instead of sugar. I know you hum Bach when you're concentrating on a difficult task. I know your face lights up when you talk about your students' progress. He stepped closer. I know you're brave and determined and far too good for the likes of Clarence Whitaker. Elizabeth's breath caught at the passion in his voice. Matt! I'll find the money, he promised, somehow. The next day, Matt was conspicuously absent from town. When Elizabeth inquired at his office, his deputy informed her that the sheriff had ridden out at dawn and left no word when he'd return. For 3 days, there was no sign of him. Elizabeth taught her classes with increasing anxiety, jumping at every sound, dreading that Matt had abandoned her, or worse, gotten himself into danger trying to help her. Whitaker, meanwhile, made his presence known, appearing at the schoolhouse at dismissal, walking past her cabin in the evenings, always with that smug, proprietary smile. On the morning of the 4th day, Elizabeth was writing arithmetic problems on the blackboard when the schoolhouse door burst open. Matt stood there, dusty from the trail, his face grim. Class dismissed early today, he announced, causing a chorus of cheers from the children. Miss Summers, you're needed. Once the children had scattered, Matt closed the door and turned to her. I've been to Denver, called in every favor I had, borrowed against my future pay, sold my best horse. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat. It's not enough, not nearly enough. Elizabeth's heart sank. How much? 800, maybe 1,000 if I sell my saddle and gun. She laid a hand on his arm. Matt, you've done more than anyone could ask. I release you from your promise. His eyes flashed. I'm not giving up. The poker game is tonight. It's my last chance. The risk is too great, she protested. The alternative is worse, he said fiercely. I can't let him take you. Something in his voice made Elizabeth study him more closely. This was more than honor or obligation driving him. Why does it matter so much to you? Matt met her gaze squarely. Because in 2 weeks of pretending, I stopped pretending. Because the thought of you with him makes me sick to my soul. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Elizabeth Summers, and I'll be damned if I'll lose you without a fight. The confession stunned her into silence. Before she could respond, he continued, I know you don't feel the same. How could you? This started as a ruse, but I need you to know that for me, it became real. Matt, she began, her voice trembling. He shook his head. Don't, not now. After tonight, when this is settled one way or another, we'll talk. He touched her cheek briefly. I need to prepare for the game. Stay in your cabin tonight. Lock the doors. Then he was gone, leaving Elizabeth with a tumult of emotions. Had she fallen in love with Matthew Vance? The thought had been hovering at the edges of her consciousness for days, but she'd refused to examine it, believing their arrangement temporary. Now, faced with the possibility of losing him, either to financial ruin, or because she'd be forced to return east with Whitaker, she confronted the truth. Yes, she loved him, his steadiness, his integrity, his quiet strength. The way he looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in his world. As evening approached, Elizabeth found herself pacing her cabin, unable to sit still. The poker game would be starting soon. Matt would be risking everything he had for her. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. A knock at her door startled her. She approached cautiously, calling, Who is it? Clarence Whitaker, my dear. We need to talk. Elizabeth's stomach knotted. She cracked the door, keeping the chain on. I have nothing to say to you. Whitaker's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. Oh, but I think you do. Your sheriff is about to ruin himself in a futile attempt to pay your debts. I thought you might want to spare him that indignity. What do you mean? I mean, I'm willing to make you a deal. Come with me now, quietly, and I'll forget the debt entirely. Your sheriff keeps his money and his pride. You keep your virtue, at least until we're properly wed in Boston. The offer shocked her. Why would you do that? Because I enjoy winning, Miss Summers, and taking you from under the nose of that frontier lawman would be most satisfying. His expression hardened. But if you refuse, and he loses tonight, I'll not only take you back east, I'll make sure everyone knows how he failed. His reputation will be in tatters. You're despicable, Elizabeth hissed. I'm practical, and I'm also not a patient man. You have 1 hour to decide. Meet me at the stagecoach office if you accept my offer. Otherwise, I'll be at the Silver Dollar, watching your knight-errant's downfall." After Whitaker left, Elizabeth collapsed into her uncle's rocking chair, her mind racing. She couldn't let Matt ruin himself for her. But the thought of surrendering to Whitaker's terms made her physically ill. There had to be another way. Elizabeth opened her uncle's desk, searching for paper and ink. She wrote quickly, tears blurring her vision. "Dearest Matt, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I cannot allow you to sacrifice everything for my sake. Know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life, and that my heart remains here, with you, even as I must go. Forever yours, Elizabeth." She sealed the letter and changed into her sturdiest traveling clothes. From beneath her mattress, she retrieved the last of her mother's jewelry, a pearl brooch she'd been saving to sell in emergency. It wouldn't fetch much, but it might buy her passage farther west, to California perhaps, where she could lose herself and start anew. Better to disappear than to see Matt ruined, or to submit to Whitaker. Dusk was falling as Elizabeth slipped from her cabin, valise in hand. She avoided the main street, taking the back path toward the stagecoach office, not to meet Whitaker, but to inquire about the next westbound stage. As she passed the alley beside the Silver Dollar saloon, a hand clamped over her mouth, and strong arms dragged her into the shadows. "Got her," a rough voice said. "Mr. Whitaker said to keep her quiet until the game's over." Elizabeth struggled against her captor, but he was too strong. She bit down hard on the hand covering her mouth. "Damn it!" the man slapped her, dazing her. "She bit me, Eddie." "Just tie her up," another voice hissed. "Boss said to keep her from interfering until the sheriff's broke." Elizabeth's blood ran cold as she realized Whitaker had never intended to honor his offer. This had been a ploy to get her away from the safety of her cabin. "Let me go!" she shouted, kicking out wildly. "Help! Someone help!" A blow to her temple sent stars exploding across her vision. As consciousness faded, she heard one of the men curse. "You didn't have to hit her that hard." She was making too much noise. "Come on, get her to the wagon before someone comes." Elizabeth woke to darkness and the rhythmic creaking of wagon wheels. Her head throbbed, and her wrists and ankles were bound. A cloth gag prevented her from calling out. By the stars visible through the wagon's canvas cover, she guessed several hours had passed. Panic rose in her chest. Whitaker's men were taking her away from Silverdale, away from Matt. Had the poker game ended? Had Matt lost everything trying to save her, only to find her gone anyway? The wagon hit a rut, jostling her painfully against its wooden floor. She worked at her bonds, trying to loosen them, but succeeded only in chafing her wrists raw. "She's awake," one of her captors called from the driver's seat. "Want me to check on her?" "Leave her," the other replied. "We'll be at the line shack by dawn. Whitaker will meet us there once he's finished his business in town." Elizabeth closed her eyes, fighting despair. She was miles from Silverdale now, being taken to some remote location. No one knew where she was. Matt would find her note and believe she'd fled voluntarily. Hours passed. The wagon finally stopped, and rough hands pulled her from the bed. Dawn was breaking over the eastern plains as her captors half-dragged her toward a dilapidated cabin nestled in a stand of cottonwoods. "Home, sweet home," one of them sneered, shoving her through the door. "At least until the boss arrives." Inside, they tied her to a chair but removed her gag. "Please," Elizabeth said, her voice hoarse. "Whatever Whitaker's paying you, it's not worth kidnapping." The older of the two men, Eddie, she recalled, looked uncomfortable. "Just following orders, madam. Mr. Whitaker's got papers saying you're his betrothed." "Papers he forged," she spat. "I never agreed to marry him." The younger captor shrugged. "Ain't our business. We get paid either way." They left her alone, taking positions outside to watch for Whitaker's arrival. Elizabeth tested her bonds again, finding them secure. The cabin was sparsely furnished: a table, some chairs, a cast-iron stove, and a narrow bed. No weapons in sight, nothing she could use to cut her ropes. Morning stretched into afternoon. Elizabeth's captors brought her water and a piece of jerky, loosening her hands just enough to eat. They refused to answer her questions about what had happened in town, about Matt. As dusk approached, hoofbeats announced a rider approaching. Elizabeth's heart hammered with fear. Whitaker had come to claim his prize, but the voice that called out wasn't Whitaker's. This is Sheriff Vance. I know you're in there. Send out Miss Summers, and no one needs to get hurt." "Matt!" Hope surged through Elizabeth. She tried to call out, but one of her captors rushed inside and clamped a hand over her mouth. "Sheriff!" Eddie called from outside. "We're just following orders. The ladies promised to Mr. Whitaker." "That's a lie, and you know it," Matt replied, his voice closer now. "Elizabeth came west to escape that forced marriage. You're holding her against her will. That's kidnapping." "We got papers." "Papers don't mean a damn thing if she doesn't consent," Matt shouted. "Last chance. Send her out, or I'm coming in." A gunshot cracked through the evening air. "We got the advantage, Sheriff," the younger captor yelled. "There's two of us, and we got your lady." The hand over Elizabeth's mouth loosened slightly as her captor shifted position. She bit down hard again, and as he jerked away, she screamed, "Matt, I'm in here! They're both armed." The next moments were chaos. The door burst open. Gunshots exploded in the small cabin. Elizabeth's chair toppled sideways as her captor dove for cover. She hit the floor hard, still bound to the chair, unable to see what was happening. More shots, a cry of pain. Then silence. "Elizabeth?" Matt's voice strained but blessedly alive. "Here," she gasped. "I'm here." Gentle hands righted her chair, then worked at the ropes binding her. Matt's face swam into view, a bloody gash across his cheekbone, but his eyes blazing with relief. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, freeing her hands. "No, just scared." She looked around the cabin. One of her captors lay motionless by the door. The other was nowhere to be seen. "The other man ran," Matt said grimly, cutting the ropes at her ankles. "I winged him, but he made it to the trees. Doesn't matter, you're safe now." As soon as she was free, Elizabeth threw herself into his arms. "I thought I'd never see you again. How did you find me?" Matt held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "Tracked the wagon. Wasn't hard they weren't trying to hide their trail." He pulled back to look at her. "Why did you leave? I found your note, but by then I already knew something was wrong." "Whitaker came to me," she explained. "Said if I went with him willingly, he'd forgive the debt. I couldn't bear the thought of you losing everything because of me. I was going to run west, not go with him, but his men grabbed me." Matt's expression darkened. "That snake. He tried to distract me while his men took you." He touched her bruised face gently. "I should have protected you better." "What happened with the poker game?" she asked. "Did you—" A slow smile spread across Matt's face. "I won, every hand." It was like Providence itself was dealing the cards. Elizabeth stared at him in wonder. "You have the money? All of it? Every cent of the 3,000, plus a bit more." His smile faded. "But when I went to tell you, you were gone. Finding your note nearly broke me, Elizabeth. Then I saw signs of a struggle near your cabin, and I knew something was wrong." "What about Whitaker?" "Locked in my jail," Matt said with grim satisfaction. "When I realized you'd been taken, I confronted him at the hotel. He denied everything, of course, but one of the stable boys had seen his men forcing a woman into a wagon. I arrested him on suspicion of kidnapping." His jaw tightened. "He'll hang if you want to press charges." Elizabeth shook her head. "I don't want more violence. I just want to be free of him." Matt helped her to her feet. "You are free. I have the money to pay your debt. Once that's settled, he has no claim on you." "And us?" she asked softly. "Before all this happened, you said you were falling in love with me." Matt's eyes softened. "Not falling, Elizabeth. Fallen. Completely and irrevocably. Even though our engagement was a pretense, especially because of that. We got to know each other without the pressure of courtship. I saw the real you, your strength, your kindness, your determination." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Elizabeth Summers, and if you'll have me, I'd like to make our false engagement a true one." Elizabeth felt tears well in her eyes. "I love you too. I think I have almost from the beginning, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself." Matt drew her close again. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. 1,000 times yes. They rode back to Silverdale together on Matt's horse, Elizabeth cradled safely in his arms. By the time they reached town, news of the sheriff's dramatic rescue had already spread. A small crowd gathered as they dismounted in front of the jail. Whitaker stood behind the bars of the cell, his face livid with rage when he saw them. "This is an outrage! I demand to be released immediately!" Matt ignored him, leading Elizabeth to his desk, where he removed a canvas bag from the safe. $3,000, Mr. Whitaker. Payment in full for the summer's family debt. He counted out the money while Elizabeth and the gathered townspeople watched. Whitaker's expression shifted from anger to calculation. "This doesn't change the fact that you assaulted me and falsely imprisoned me. Sheriff, I'll have your badge for this." "Kidnapping is a hanging offense in this territory," Matt replied evenly. "Your men confessed before one of them ran. The other's dead. Do you really want to pursue this?" Whitaker's face paled. "A misunderstanding. I merely asked them to ensure Miss Summers' safe passage back east." "Against her will," Matt pointed out. "Fortunately for you, Miss Summers is merciful. She's not pressing charges on one condition." "Which is?" Elizabeth stepped forward. "You will take this money, return to Boston, and never contact me again. You will acknowledge in writing that any arrangement between us is null and void, and you will leave on the next eastbound stage." Whitaker glared at her for a long moment, then nodded stiffly. "Fine. Have your Western life and your sheriff. Boston society would never accept you back anyway." "A blessing by my measure," Elizabeth replied calmly. True to his word, Clarence Whitaker departed Silverdale the next morning, $3,000 richer, but thoroughly defeated. Elizabeth stood with Matt on the boardwalk, watching the stagecoach disappear in a cloud of dust. "It's really over," she murmured. "I'm free." Matt squeezed her hand. "Free to choose your own path." She smiled up at him. "I've chosen. My path is here, with you." 6 weeks later, on a golden autumn afternoon, Elizabeth Summers became Elizabeth Vance in a ceremony at Silverdale's small church. The entire town turned out to celebrate the marriage of their sheriff to the schoolteacher, a union that had begun as a ruse but blossomed into the truest of loves. Their first year together brought challenges: a harsh winter, trouble with cattle rustlers, a fire that nearly destroyed the schoolhouse, but through it all, their bond only strengthened. Elizabeth expanded the school, adding adult education classes in the evenings. Matt continued as sheriff, earning a reputation throughout the territory for his fairness and courage. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Elizabeth discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled their small home with even greater joy. "A son or daughter," Matt marveled, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Our own family." "The family we chose," Elizabeth reminded him, thinking back to those fateful words that had changed her life. "We'll choose each other or not at all." In December of 1880, Emma Vance entered the world, her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit evident from her first breath. 2 years later, Samuel joined the family, followed by twins Catherine and Joseph in 1885. Silverdale grew along with the Vance family. The silver mines continued to produce. The railroad came through, bringing new settlers and prosperity. Matt eventually hung up his sheriff's badge to start a horse ranch outside town, fulfilling a long-held dream. Elizabeth continued teaching until their fourth child was born, then devoted herself to raising their family and writing educational materials that were published back east. On their 20th anniversary, Matt surprised Elizabeth with a trip to Europe, the dream she'd shared with him during those early evenings on her porch. They spent 6 weeks traveling through England, France, and Italy, seeing the art and architecture she'd only read about in books. "Was it everything you imagined?" Matt asked as their ship sailed back to America. "More," Elizabeth replied, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the sunset over the Atlantic. "But not because of the cathedrals or paintings?" "No?" She smiled up at him, the years having only deepened her love for this steadfast, honorable man. "Because I saw it all with you. The greatest adventure of my life began the day you said we would choose each other. Everything since has been a gift I never expected." Matt kissed her tenderly. "I thank God every day for sending you to Silverdale on that stagecoach, even with the gunfight that welcomed you." Elizabeth laughed. "Especially with the gunfight. It brought you to my rescue right away. And I've been rescuing you ever since," he teased. "We've been rescuing each other," she corrected gently. They returned to Silverdale and the embrace of their family, Emma, now teaching at the school her mother had once led. Samuel working the ranch with his father, the twins finishing their education. As they entered their comfortable home, filled with 20 years of memories, Elizabeth felt a wave of gratitude. The life she'd found here in the West, the life she'd chosen with the man she loved, had exceeded every dream she'd ever dared to dream. That night, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the western mountains gold, just as it had on her first evening in Silverdale, Elizabeth rested her head on Matt's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have gone?" she asked. "If Whitaker had never followed me west, we might never have admitted our feelings for each other." Matt's arm tightened around her. "I'd have found a way to tell you," he said confidently. "Maybe not as dramatically, but I couldn't have kept loving you in silence forever." "So sure of yourself," she teased. "Sure of us," he corrected, turning to kiss her softly. "From the moment you agreed to our false engagement, something in me knew it would become real. We were always meant to choose each other, Elizabeth. Always." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elizabeth Vance thought about the long, winding path that had brought her to this moment, from the frightened young woman fleeing an unwanted marriage to the fulfilled wife, mother, and teacher she had become. "Always," she echoed, nestling closer to the man who had helped her find not just safety, but love and purpose in this wild, beautiful land they called home. And in the soft evening air, with the distant call of a nighthawk and the gentle creaking of their porch swing, the story that had begun with a desperate bargain continued its unfolding, a testament to the power of choosing love over obligation, freedom over fear, and each other above all else.